Hi, I'm Amedeo Beretta here, and in this video we're going to see how to manage motion capture animation after it has been retargeted to our character rig. I haven't been doing much on YouTube lately because of a short movie I was finishing with some of my students, but now I'm back. We will see how to manage arms animation in a flexible and non-destructive way, how to manage contact positions and feet animation, how to add acting beats to existing motion capture animation, how to animate fingers when you do not possess finger motion capture to begin with, and we will go through a general overview on how to keep the workflow flexible and non-destructive, with the idea of sparing hours of work through the application of very simple workflows. This video is an extract from my Twitch streams, which I run every Thursday at 6 PM London time. That is at 6 UTC, Coordinated Universal Time. This is part of the training I supported my students with when working together on a short movie. If you're interested, follow along. I worked with motion capture on a couple of movies in visual effects and on some video games. So I'm going to explain here a couple of the techniques that I think made my life easier and some common issues that I think you encounter usually when you work with motion capture. Now, when you work with motion capture, of course, you want your keys to be on the controllers themselves so that when the character moves, it moves through the controllers and now you can edit the controllers. Of course, the main problem with motion capture is that there are so many keys. Every frame is a key with motion capture, which makes things particularly complicated for the animator. But if you know a couple of tricks, you don't need to sweat it too much. So there are some common issues with motion capture. The first issue that you normally encounter with motion capture is noise. So every now and then, depending on the suit you're using and on the animation you're animating, you may get noise in the controls. In this case, for this motion capture, I don't think noise is much of a problem. But in theory, if you open up the graph editor in Maya, you see that you can see all the curves of the motion capture. Don't be afraid of looking at them. If you think that the animation is very noisy, one thing that you could do is you could go under curves, and there's something called butterworth filter. If you go in there and you execute it, you see that it tends to smooth down the curves. So this is the curve as they were before I ran the script, and you see that this way I sort of even out the curves. So the butterworth filter or any denoiser filter that you find in a 3D software are useful, but you want to make sure that you don't indiscriminately apply them, because maybe some motion needs to be noisy, okay? So in general, it's a good tool. In particular, you always need to evaluate, is this the tool I really need to use for this shot? Because very often that's not really needed. You have to imagine that a lot of motion capture suits, they really have already their own denoising system. So the data we are seeing in Maya right now comes from a XN suit, and this XN suit has its own software that already does denoise the curves. So if you just go around and indiscriminately denoise this animation, it's not necessarily an improvement. When you apply a denoise, you always want to make a play blast of before and after and check if that denoise makes some sense. So that's usually the first trick that we apply to animation. How do we clean this animation? So if there is too much noise and the style of the animation we are producing does not require that amount of noise and the denoiser doesn't help, one of the tricks people used was to, and it still is to a certain degree, was to select the controls. Actually, we'll grab just the top controls. Let me just select a smaller range so that we don't waste too much time. You can go edit and keys and bake simulation. And in there you tell Maya, can you just keep every third key, every third frame? I have to select the channels I want to bake. As I bake, it's going to take a while because it needs to go through the timeline. There are two things to notice. One is that at the end of that operation, you see that now the data is a lot less dense. The other thing is that anything that is beyond the timeline has been deleted. So a bake operation by default gets rid of any key that is beyond the beginning and the end of a timeline. So that's something that you need to be aware of if you run a bake simulation. because if you run it on a very small section of your animation, you're actually deleting anything else that happens. Now, the other problem that you will encounter is that if an object is rotating, check out the left hand in here. If an object is rotating, you see what's going on there. Every now and then, these crazy rotations that weren't there earlier on, and they almost always happen in the interpolation, not on the key. Actually, the key are working. If you go between keys using period and comma, you see that the keys are working. They work just fine. But if we go in the interpolation, we have a lot of issues. And that's because if you hold down E and left mouse button and go gimbal, then you will be able to show the actual axis that the animation is using to be evaluated in the 3D software. In here, you see that we are in a gimbal lock. A gimbal lock occurs when you lose the ability to rotate on one axis. Typically, the average user operate object axis, so the illusion is that you have total control over the shape. But the point here is that the values you see changing in the channel box up here, these guys in here, are actually calculated in gimbal axis, so these guys. And if you find yourself in a situation like this one, then very often the interpolation in Maya goes a bit crazy. Now, how do you solve that? You go back to your friend, the graph editor, you select any curve, it doesn't matter which one, and then you run what's called an Euler filter. You go curves and you go Euler, or I guess if you're German, Euler filter, and you click on it, and Maya recomputes the rotation there. It will try to always rotate following the shorter path to the next pose, and very often it nails it. It actually works. This is something that in MOCAP happens all the time, to the point that one of the things I typically used to do when I was starting with a MOCAP clip was to grab all controls, grab the graph editor, and Euler filter the whole thing. I don't think nowadays you need to do it anymore, because I think a lot of the MOCAP software already unwrap the rotation in a decent way. I found that it helped me in the past, so if you find yourself in a situation where you get crazy rotation when you delete keys, then Euler filter is your best friend in that case. Those are a couple of common issues that you encounter with motion capture. If you are retargeting motion capture to IK hands, IK hands are wonderful, and when I animate, I use mostly IK hands anyway, depending on the scene, but in general, very often I end up doing a lot of stuff with IK hands. If your actor, in this case Jake, who is on this call, he was wearing the suit, if your actor was keeping the arm straight, and you're retargeting to IK, and then the director of the movie or yourself tell you, or you tell yourself, look, I need this character to be leaning a bit more towards the left-hand side of the camera. You might as well grab all of the controls in there, put them on a layer, and you could rotate it. If you're not familiar with animation layers, please check the link to my animation layers video in the description of this video. I would really like to create an overlay card to this video so that you just click on it and get to the tutorial, but in practice, YouTube won't let me do it until I get to 1,000 subscribers. So hurry up, tell your grandma to subscribe to my channel. Now, what happens is this, right? Since I am rotating the chest, and the hand is not following and it's in IK, I'm bending the hand. And I'm bending the hand for the whole duration of the animation. What I would like to have as a behavior is rather an arm that keeps the shape but moves down with the chest. And that can be done if the IK controller is either following the chest or if you're using FK. So in general, I prefer to clean the arms in FK when I clean MOCAP. It's not a big problem if you ever targeted your animation to IK. The important thing is that you have a way to get that FK going if you need it. And in our particular production, the short movie you're working on, I've wrote a little bit of a script in here that if I execute it, it's a work in progress, guys, so now I'm running it and I don't know if the computer will explode or not, but if I execute this script on an advanced skeleton rig, say I grab an IK control from an arm and I execute the script, it's going to throw me an error because I first need to load the picker from advanced skeleton, which I forgot to load. So this needs to be open for advanced skeleton. And once that's open, you grab any control for one arm, only one arm. It doesn't work with multiple arms. You have to do one arm at a time. Then with the picker open, and you run the script, and Maya is going to run through its routine, well, the script rather, and Maya is going to follow along. Give it a couple of seconds, well, actually more probably. At the end of this process, the arm will do or should do exactly the same motion, but in FK. The key word in here is should do, but you see, it does. Really, when you ask yourself, should I use IK or FK? It's in modern animation, it's almost a silly question because you use whatever is useful for that portion of the animation and then you convert it for the next part of the animation. And at a certain point, there are some very cool tools that can convert and keep a minimum amount of keys. But if you're converting between IK and FK, in practice, you almost always end up with one key every frame. But you shouldn't really be worried about that. The important thing is to keep cool, you're pros, you have everything under control. But now the beauty of it is that if I rotate this thing, you see that now the arm stays straight. And if the arm goes behind the buttock like it does, it shouldn't be a big deal because I have two options in here. One is I could create another layer there and just rotate the arm out. And now the arm will stay out for the whole duration, for instance. That's one solution. The other solution could be to have the arm in global, for instance. The problem with global is that when you turn global on a rig, that's what happens usually, right? It goes to another pose, so you need a converter. So before you even start animating, you have to ask yourself, wait, is it easier to clean that or that? And, do I need to have FK or IK? I would always recommend to clean the hands in FK if possible when you're dealing with MOCAP, and at least as a first pass. And then only later go into IK to convert it to global without spending 10 minutes doing it, convert it to global, and then on a layer, just unwrap the rotation manually. It's not a super great way of doing it, but at least now I should have it in global. And if I now change the chest rotation, it stays in global. It keeps the rotation ratio between the elbow and the shoulder there. That's another way, another trick you can play. Although if you are at a stage in which you have to create a layer just to make an FK arm global, then you might as well make it global before converting the animation from IK to FK. So for instance, let's start with the arm in IK. You see the right arm works just fine. Then if I set the arm to FK there, you will see that the FK arm doesn't quite work. There are no keys in there. Now I can grab an FK arm controller, set the global to 10, so now the arm won't be working, but at least it will be in global. When you rotate the chest, you will notice it's in global. Now that that controller is set to global, I can go back to IK, so to the old animation, and now I can use my script or any script you will find in production. An animation studio should have it, to convert animation from IK to FK. That will give you an FK arm which is set to global and has the same animation of your MOCAP. Now we convert the animation from IK to FK. And once you've done it, you will find yourself with the arm in global, the ability to control the spine without affecting the internal economy of the arm, which is a great feature to have. And now everything will be much easier. Say that your animation was retargeted to a local FK arm. Like in this case, for instance, where the arm is in local, and when you rotate the spine, you find yourself changing the animation of the arm considerably. So what could you do then? Well, you could do as demonstrated earlier on, where I just put the arm on the layer and set it to global, but you could also convert first the animation back to IK. Again, you need to have access to a script to do that, or you need to write your own. An FK to IK script converter is usually a good idea anyway. It makes you spare so many hours. Now the animation is onto IK, and just like I did earlier on, I can go back to FK, set the arm to global, and perform the conversion. So just like I did earlier on, except we went from FK to IK to set the arm to global, and then back to FK. This makes you spare hours and hours of work. You see that now we have full control over the arm, and it took us only a few minutes to have control over the arm. So that's a bunch of things that you probably want to consider to begin with. Let's say that we decide to clean this arm in IK. To do that, I will open up another file. It's not really MOCAP, but it's structured as if it were. I created a problem on purpose. And here we have two arms. One is IK, the other one is FK. And when I press play, you see they both perform the same operation. They both go up that way. That's good. Now let's say that this motion on the way up was a bit noisy and they told us clean it. I could run a baking operation, but what happens, let's say, if I delete everything between the last key and the first key? So what happens is that the end and begin pose are the same, right? But if you check the interpolation of these arms, you will find something very interesting. You see that the FK arm still works pretty nicely, right? So it does what it needs to do. But if you are in IK, the IK is going to linearly interpolate between the first pose and the up pose, which are on the same vertical line. So it's simply speaking going to translate up that way, because IK doesn't know about arcs. So you see that sometimes it's just much better to clean an FK arm if you want to get nice arcs from motion capture than it is to clean an IK arm. So these are things that you really need to consider. And that's why I wrote that script that converts the animation from IFK to IK, because as an animator, yeah, you certainly can do your job, but if you have a tool that makes your job easier to begin with, you should definitely employ it. There are just tools that are useful in some situations. A lot of people, for instance, they are a bit wary of advanced skeleton because of the fact that it's an old tool. But at the same time, it gives you a fast rig, it works out of the box, cannot really complain with too much, and it's for free. And can you really complain? I don't think so. It even gives you facial animation. Slap it on a face and it gives you facial rigging. And not only that, but if you go into the biped picker, you can retarget MOCAP through that window if you want. Now, we have seen that it's a good idea to clean the arms in FK if you need nice arcs, and that it's a good idea to have a way to convert the animation between FK and IK. If you can have a converter, use it. In companies, usually you have a converter. Although I was surprised in some big companies where I worked, the converter wasn't there, and it was an animator who wrote it. And it was the same animator who taught me how to script, by the way. It was long ago, and I think nowadays, whichever company you go in, there will be a converter for you waiting. Now, let's have a look at something that you have to very often fix in MOCAP. And one thing that you often have to clean in MOCAP is contact for the feet. Whenever a foot is on the floor in MOCAP, you will find out that the foot is quite never solidly on the floor. So let's find an area where the foot is problematic. So in here, for instance, see that? It's on the floor, but it's not on the floor. I mean, it moves and it keeps moving around. So feet movement in MOCAP is something that needs cleaning. Also, depending on the mockup system you have, you might have the animation already that retargeted to the toes, and you might have very precise toe motion there, or you might have really, really bad toe motion. My suggestion is when you can retarget toe motion to the roll of your rig, do that, if you can, that is. Because if you retarget the toe motion to this guy in here, now you will find yourself having to counter animate this controller to keep the tip on the floor, so it's not probably a good idea. Let's think about the position of the foot. I look at this and I think the foot is just too close to the other foot, so the right foot in there is just too close. So what can I do in here? I could go and move this key, right, and position it there, but if I do that, what happens to the immediately available key after and before? They jump, right? Because this edit is just for the single key. So that's when I really need to have layers. So I will create a new layer in there, and I will, on the new layer, I will call it side move, side offset. As I do so, I have my control on the layer, I can move it out this way, and as I press S, now the offset is there for the whole animation. See that? The character is walking with the legs a bit apart. So for instance, I worked on a movie, it was a Disney movie from 2012. It was John Carter. Plenty of these dudes. They were, the background, the crowds were all mock-up. 4 arms! 4! Why 4? In this case, a good approach would be to clean the primary arms first, then duplicate the animation to the secondary arms, and offset that animation by a few frames. And then with animation layers, you'd go back and you just added offsets so that the arms wouldn't look exactly the same. So that's a case scenario. And certainly the first thing that I did on every shot that I encounter in motion capture, not just for this movie, but overall, is to first fix the posture of the character. So before even fixing the motion, say that the motion capture comes from a very well-trained athlete who is donning the suit, but your character needs to be a guy who's really unfriendly and really not very well evolved. You don't want your character to look to have a posture like this one, because that's way too refined. This dude is a serious person. We want our character to look a bit nastier. So I would put the spine on a layer. I would have the arms in FK. So maybe what I can do in here is I could convert the arms to FK just to show you one arm, Oh, I need to open up the picker. I always forget that. There you go. I will not do one arm because I don't want you guys to stay here and watch me converting animation for, I don't know, for 2 arms. I mean, once you see it running, you get the picture. Now I have my animation in there. And with those controls that I have on that layer, I want this guy, as I said, to look a bit more unevolved. So I will grab the spine and I will rotate the spine forward. I will rotate the head controllers a bit more backward. Something is going on. It's me being stupid, I guess. Let's see. There you go. There you go. And then maybe I can even put the root on the layer, on that layer. So I can move the root a bit to the back, set a key, move the spine a little bit forward, and the neck a little bit backward. So now you have a character. Obviously, I will have to, in this case, since the arm is not in global, I will have to manually counter animate its position. So now the whole loop of animation is going to look a bit less evolved, right? And this guy now suddenly looks like a caveman when the actual mocap really was of a much more evolved individual. So the very first thing I do with mocap is first nail the posture. What is my character thinking? Which kind of character is this dude? And what's the emotion he's going through at this stage? What's the shot about? And in our short movie, for instance, we have a scene in which there is a bunch of characters and they are working in a tired way, some of them anyway. I mean, I could have used the non-tired mocap clip and just changed the posture to give me that storytelling device that I needed. Say I didn't have a mocap clip for the other animation. So this is really the first thing I do to mocap before even thinking of anything else. I first set up the rig, of course, so that it's easy to work with. So the arms will be in global, the arms will be in FK probably. And then I change the posture to what I need. Right now, I don't need it. We were talking about feet earlier on. So now let's say that we have successfully moved the foot to the side, but now we're looking at it. We cannot not notice we cannot not notice, right, that the foot is sort of sliding. You see it's moving around, and then even here you see it's moving. That's a bummer. So I could go in here. I will just zoom in on the timeline. I could go in here and I could just, you guessed it, I could just duplicate 761 over to, say, let's find a place where this guy lifts off. So we'll go to a bit later. Oh, I need to find another piece of animation. Let's do it here. There you go. So let's say I could duplicate the frame of the foot when the foot is on the ground. So at 736, I have a key. Then all these keys maybe I don't need. And then I could duplicate 736 to 746. Now the foot stays planted solidly there, and then it starts moving. But you see what the problem is. Now it starts moving, but it glitches forward, right? Because earlier on, this animation was happening in more than one frame. Now it glitches forward. And then, of course, I could go in there and I could say, you know what, I will just delete the keys. It was going to be all right. And now things start to go downhill. But I mean, I'm a pro and I'm saying, yeah, I know this kind of stuff. I've been around for so long now. I know what an Euler filter is. You can't win over me just this way. There you go, Euler filter, take this, Maya. But then I'm thinking, wow, but this pose really is not what I wanted. The pose was this way. But now I'm thinking, but now the tip goes under the floor, so I have to move it up. And before you know it, you're spending 15 minutes on a lift off that was working and now it doesn't work anymore. So what you want to do instead is you want to be non-destructive in your approach to animation. You want to try and keep the motion coming out of the foot, but just plant the feet on the floor. So let's try that. I will disable the side offset for a second because I want to try and play a trick. So I know that a tool I have installed on my machine called Red9, which is a free tool. Well, you can pay for it if you want the advanced tools, but in practice, it's otherwise free with the basic functionalities. You can download it for free from the web. The installation is very easy, and on my YouTube channel there is a link on how to install it. There is a video on how to install it. And in the comments there is someone who installed it in a much faster way than I did. So you should probably go to the video, don't watch the video, and read the comments instead. So now let's have a look at this step off, and let's see how we fix it. So we know, I was saying that in Red9 there is a tool called the animation toolkit. I know, because I made a YouTube video about that, that there is a tool named Track or Stabilize in there. The Track or Stabilize does this. Let's have a look and see what it does. If I select, I don't know, these keys, and I go time range, I select the time range on the Track and Stabilize, and I say process forward, Maya is going to process from the first key I selected forward, and you see it's planted on the floor. I don't even need to copy the keys. It's planting it for me. And then I will still have the glitch. You see, I still have the glitch. So I'm thinking, okay, so that stabilizes it. Yes, so I have it. Now, but the kickoff is still sucks. I still didn't fix it. So how can I? And I'm thinking, maybe, and I say maybe, I could put this foot on a layer, stabilize it on a layer, and then zero out the layer progressively as the foot lifts off. I think I will try that, because maybe it will work. I have no guarantee it will, of course. So I will, first of all, select the control, add the control to a layer, and this is going to be my step, and I will do just one step, of course. So I will go to where I need this step to be settled. So let's say that the contact is, I don't know, a 691. I'm making it up. I select between 691 and I don't know. I can even select a few frames after the kickoff. I don't care. I feel careless today, leaving the dangerous way. Now with this selection on, I can say time range is on. I am onto the step layer. Please notice I disable the side offset. I don't really need that. Oh, I'm stupid. Let me reselect. There you go. And then I'm going to go. So I'm on the step layer. I have time range on, and I go process forward. So from 691 forward, and I'm going to click on it, and red 9 should, and I say should, be able to stabilize. You see the foot is stabilized. Now the geometry is moving because the root up there is pulling, okay? But the control is perfectly stabilized. Now the problem is that this guy is lifting off, but it's lifting off late, right? If I go and disable the step, the lift off actually happens here. You see at around 744. So I can go onto the step layer and say, oh, I got it wrong. Actually, you know what? Delete all these keys. I don't really need them. So now, as I lift off from the offset where I was at. So the lift off is exactly the same as it was, right? Then I go find the next contact and I say, that's when I want the animation to look exactly the same way. So I go to 0. That's it. And the offset that I introduced by planting the foot down is going to be diluted. You see wonderful interpolation there. It's going to be diluted between 743 and 756. But the most attentive of you guys will have noticed that there is a bit of a strange interpolation there. It's not very easy to spot, but I think if we look very closely, we can see that there is a problem there. But hey, we said it many times now, we are pros. So I will open up the graph editor, make sure I am on the step layer, grab any rotation key. One will be enough. You grab one and it's going to Euler filter all of them, okay, not just one curve. I go and curves, Euler filter, and I'm not sure, I'm very lucky tonight. I think I will try again. Usually it works, but of course, why should it work when I am live? So let's go Euler, and there you go, it worked. Actually, now that I selected the three curves, it worked. I don't know why. Usually if you select one, it works for anyway, but wait, that goes to, let's say you have to select the three of them, okay? Let's cut it short, just to be sure. And now I have the interpolation working perfectly well, and with one silver bullet, I fixed the step. I fixed the sliding, I fixed the step. Now let's say that I want to have some foot roll in there, right? That would look okay. I think some foot roll. Can we maybe? Yeah. So maybe I can do, I'm thinking maybe I can remember this pose, and I can maybe say to red 9, hey, you know what? I changed my mind. Just stabilize the foot in there. And then I go to 741 on that layer, and I am going to check the roll in there, and I don't want any key on the roll in there, so I will sync with the timeline display. So when you see when I select a channel, I'm only seeing the key on that channel, but you see that there are keys on translation and rotation, but really the roll doesn't have any. So maybe between 741 and whichever key it was, because I don't remember it, say this guy, I can roll up. Well, I don't know how much I should be rolling. Let's say I roll up that way. So there you go. Now I'm rolling, and then I'm moving forward. And as I move forward, I can zero out the roll when I feel it makes sense to do that. There you go. And now I also introduce the roll. With layers and with the right tools, you actually can do a lot. So as an animator, the only thing you don't want to do is to just animate with the basic tools of Maya. You have to imagine yourself, as you animate, you have to imagine yourself in a shed full of tools. And based on the tool you need, you just grab the tool and you use it. In practice, you're making very complicated furniture. So you need the tool that gives you that shape, that works that wood in the right way. I say that because I made the furniture in my house, so I know something about the pain of furniture making and the lack of tools. So the tools are really making a difference. The most successful animators that I animated with were the people who had a lot of tools, and they were totally agnostic. If they had to do a particular kind of animation, they first found the tool that made it easier, and then they did the animation. They didn't go head on. I was much younger, and I would tend to dive head first into a wall. And then after a few of those bumps in the head, I was like, maybe I could use a tool, all wavy and dizzy. So now we have seen how to fix the feed controller, but the beauty of it all is that if I now enable again the side offset, this whole thing is going to work with the side offset as well. Total control. I mean, I don't have a GIF with the cat of James Bond, but if I could, I would probably put it on right now. So now we can just remember that we have the side offset in there. Another thing for which these layers are very useful is when you have a character and you need it to step in a different position. So let's say that the director says, beautiful animation. In English-speaking country, the feedback always starts with, great, fantastic animation, guys. Can you just change it? So the first part of the feedback is always amazing. And then the second part is, but change it. Let's say the director says, I want this step here to happen a bit more on camera right. Okay. I can grab the controllers, the root and let's say the left foot. I can put them on a layer, and then I can say, you know what, at the contact, I want these guys to move to camera right. And it seems to me that even the hand needs to be on that layer. So I will put that hand on the layer as well. I will use world axis, because if you use object now, they will all move in different directions. It's not really useful. So I will use world, and I will move this guy to the side in there. And now as the dude is walking, before he just leaves the floor with the foot, I will zero out. And now as the guy is walking, there you go. I can make him land a bit more camera right where the director wants it. And he's going to stay there for the rest of the animation anyway. Layers are super powerful. You should really use them. To be honest, a lot of the tools I use in Maya, I noticed that they are already built in Blender, for instance. That's why I think Blender has something going for it. Because a lot of the animation tools that I would normally have to manually install in Maya, they're already in Blender. Animation layers are still not there. You have a paid for plugin, I think, if you want to use animation layers in Blender, but I'm pretty sure this is going to change soon. And there are some jobs now, more and more, being done in Blender. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on Blender, because I think it's a very cool tool for animators. It's a different philosophy than Maya, a very different way of working in many ways, but I think it's just as valid. Now we have learned a bit about the intricacies of layers. We have seen how to fix feed contacts and sliding. If you want to add, say, a character looking around, in MOCAP, guys, it often happens that you have an animation of a dude walking and the director was there when the animation was recorded. The director was the one who said, cut, and he said, great, that's final, we have it. The director is also the same person who will tell you to change that animation. I'm not bad-mouthing directors. The problem is that once you are into a shot, you realize that that animation that you had on a green screen or on an empty set is not really the animation you wanted. Which is why now modern filmmaking and visual effects, they have all sorts of tools to make sure that the actors and the directors have a clear idea of what happens on screen, because otherwise they go back to the visual effects facility and they just ask you to change stuff because they really had a different idea when they were on the set. So let's say that the director is happy about the walk now, but he's telling you he needs the guy to look around. As he walks, he wants the guy to just observe and observe. That's when, as an animator, you would shoot some references to begin with to understand how quickly the turn is going to work for the head. And then, as an animator, you would also create a layer with the head and a bit of the chest, I would say, on it as well, the chest controller. And then you will go in there, you will say, okay, let's say that at the end of the first step, the dude is going to look to one side. So I'm going to create a key, and then about 5-6 frames later, I'm going to rotate everything a tiny bit. You see how I do it. I select all controls and I rotate all of them. Then I deselect the root control and I rotate all of them a bit more. Then I deselect the root control and rotate them all of them a bit more, and then I rotate the head. This way, the action of rotating is something that happens for the whole body. So we did the rotation of the character looking to one side, and then once we're ready to walk forward, the director says he needs to look forward. Well, that's easy. What I can do is I can just zero out the layer, and now the character is walking, looks to one side, and then decides to move on. He's not interested in that stuff. He's seen better things in his life. What I was saying is, when you work with MOCAP and you have that density of data, you do not want to craft an animation that is already final, because 99% of the time, the client, the director, or yourself will want to change that animation. So you would rather block it out this way very, very roughly and see what the effect is in the shot, and ask for direction and say, go to the client and say, hey, what do you think? Do you think it works? And the client will say something along the lines of, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted, but the way it turns is a bit too harsh. And that's okay, because you tell him, yeah, that's rough, that's a rough change. We just wanted to know if the beats we put into it were what you wanted. So that's how the exchange would work with a client or a director. You almost never want to go to a client with a finished piece of animation, because the time it will take you to finish that piece, it will be very long. And maybe you're not even doing what the client wants or what the movie needs. So rough it up a little bit, and then once you know in the shot that's what you want, then you refine it. Okay, don't refine it any earlier. It's pointless. There are always going to be changes. I mean, maybe you worked 1-2 weeks on a shot, or 4 weeks. The editor and the director sit down and they say, actually, we don't need this sequence anymore. The movie works much better without. And your animation goes just like that. The very first time it happens, you tend to be a bit sad, but then you learn that that's not your movie. So you're paid to animate on it. So if they decide that that sequence doesn't have to be there, well, then it doesn't have to be there. And you have to take it professionally. So you just cry yourself to sleep, but outside the company, never inside, okay? Inside, you're stone-faced, you're the pro there. Outside, you can cry and hug trees and poles in the street, and when the rain drizzles on you, especially if you're working on such a sad scene. But you have to get used to it anyway. I think one of the first rules that I read on a book about animation was that you shouldn't get emotionally attached to your work. And that's really true. Sometimes you want to do a particular piece of animation because you think it's cool, but that's not what the movie wants. And so you have to rip your heart out and redo the animation. So get ready for that as well if you want to work with animation. Now we have done also a way to tweak the animation, and similarly I could say, you know what, maybe this dude could, as he looks to the side, he could lift his arm. So I will put the arm and the pull vector on a layer, and he could say, wait a second, he could say, I'm a bit worried now, so I will lift my arm and protect myself a little bit with that arm. When you use IK, the most important thing is to make sure it doesn't look like you're manipulating a puppet. Always keep the forearm and the wrist in a certain relationship to one another so that they don't look too broken. So now as the guy stops and looks, he's like, what's going on there? And then as he starts walking, you can go back to 0. So I have another layer for the arm in there. I can go down and start working again. There you go. So now let's say that you're quite happy about the result, and the supervisor is, everybody's super happy. The whole family of the director is happy. I mean, the world couldn't be a better place probably. So now I think it's time for us to merge down the animation. So I will go and select all layers, and I will go merge layers, and I will just merge them down with a smartbake. You will have to be patient, because if you have a slow computer, an old computer, and you have many keys, the smartbake will take a while. And you certainly don't want to click in Maya as the smartbake is in progress. Maya doesn't take it very lightly when people are clicking and he's thinking. Maya doesn't do multitask, I think. I mean, it does in technical terms, but in this case, if you start clicking in the viewport, I mean, that's the best way to piss the software off. So in general, before you merge your animation, you always want to save it. Because what if the merge does not succeed? What if Maya crashes? I mean, there are so many ifs in this animation that, I mean, your head is going to spin if you start counting them. So just save before and save after with another name so that you can go back if you need. 99% of the time, layers work in such a flawless way that you wouldn't even believe you're working in Maya. But there's always that 1% that is going to spoil your day. So in here, now that we have our animation, we want to have a look at it again, and we have our nice animation in there. It's MOCAP, and it does exactly what we need it to do. Look at that. Even the stuff we added feels like MOCAP because it is based on that MOCAP noise. We didn't have to recreate the animation. Let's say we want to reduce some of the noise that I have here, for instance, on the arm. You see there's a bit of noise in there. I'm a bit careful here because I have two ways. I could use a butterworth filter in there to smooth down the animation, or I could bake the animation on first. Some of you might have watched a movie called Monster House. This guy here. So Monster House, but for the time I think it was quite a good movie, and I think more than anything the story was entertaining. I watched it and I thought the story was nice. I thought, wow, that's actually quite a good story. The mocap in there, I think it was one of the first feature films with mocap. The mocap in there is at times a bit rough, but you see it's not very noisy, and it looks as if the way it was done, I mean, that's my opinion of it anyway, is by baking the animation. So they would just go onto bake simulation and bake every third, and that will clean the animation of the noise. The problem with doing this thing, so if I now bake the animation on thirds for this hand, there you go. Now what happens is that in the poses the hand will work. Well, we have the usual, I should probably make a shortcut to the Euler filter on my shelf because with mocap you keep using it all the time. So now you see that the animation kind of works, but there are times in which the arc doesn't work, for instance, and there will be also times in which, since your spine is moving not on thirds anymore, you will have this kind of effect. You will have the spine moving and the arm bending and the hand staying there. If your attempt at cleaning this motion is to bake every 2 or every 3, fair enough. But if you're cleaning the IK hand, then try to clean any control that has an effect on the IK hand, so that relationship within the arm and the body is always kept the same. Every time you're baking a key on the arm, you're baking a key on any control that is controlling the arm. So the relative bend of the arm will always stay the same. By the way, when you open up the curves of your mocap and you see these kind of jumps, so a 1-frame jump and then frames close to one another, that's almost always a gimbal lock. In fact, now if I run an Euler filter, check it out, they go away. So we see that it's almost a guarantee that it's gimbaling somehow. I don't think gimbaling is a verb, by the way, but since we are into new languages, let's do it. Let's invent new words. So now I'll press play, and you see that the animation now is pretty clean. There's a bit of noise in the left arm somewhere there. That would be an approach to cleaning mocap. Now I just baked every 2, and I think it worked. There is a bit of noise when I go up here. You see that the elbow there is a bit uncertain. It's like it doesn't know what you want him to do. If you don't need that, my suggestion is just get rid of it. There you go. See that? Clean. So try to first be non-destructive when you deal with mocap. So set the rig so that it's easy to work. Be non-destructive when you tweak things like contact, posture, so that kind of stuff. Start with the posture, always the posture first after you set up your rig. Make sure the character posture is reflecting what your movie needs. Then I would say, even before tweaking the feet, my suggestion would probably be to add those acting beats that the animation needs to have now, that the director didn't spot at the beginning and that you really want to have. And only once you have that whole thing approved, you go and fix the sliding feet. Only then, because you never know, maybe you spend 2 hours fixing the feet and they look like they were made by Michelangelo and designed by Raphael, but then the director goes in and he says, actually, now I want him to jump. That's when you flip the table, right? But if you jotted down the poses first and you kept the mocap non-destructive, then now all of a sudden, even if the director tells you make him jump, you're like, yeah, I mean, you don't care, because at that stage it took you just a few minutes to fix the animation. So try to do first the things that are requirements of the scene, and only last you go in there and you micromanage the controls. Now, fingers and motion capture, a love story. So you will have to go in there and do it manually. Now, some manufacturers, so if you're using Xsense or Rococo as a manufacturer, this is a pretty cheap in terms of, cheap in terms of cost, not in terms of a result, motion capture suit from Switzerland. I tried it. It's actually quite good. The main issue I had with it is that in the building where I was trying it, there were a lot of underground cables and steel beams, and they would interfere with the suit. But if you try it in a friendlier environment, it actually works very well. And it comes with smart gloves if you pay a premium. That will give you finger motion. I can guarantee you that you will still have to clean the fingers. When do you have to clean the fingers? So if the camera is this one, then you probably don't need to clean the fingers. But if the camera starts to be something like this, then you probably need to clean the fingers. So it depends on how close to the camera. Same thing for the feet. If your camera is like this, then the feet need to look perfect. But if the camera is like this, then the feet need not slide too much. So it's all relative to what we see in the camera. Now, fingers. At the end of the day, if you're doing, you have to think of it in practical terms. If you're doing very realistic animation and you have the tool to get that motion from the actor, why would you really? Unless you particularly enjoy pain for the sake of pain and you want to spend your time in the graph editor cleaning that stuff, you might as well use what the mocap gives you and just make it look nicer when it doesn't look convincing and call it a day. There will be other projects in which you will be able to do stylized animation if you have picked the company that does that kind of work. The only thing you need to be aware of is that very often if you're working in a visual effects facility and there are humans involved and they are digital, well, motion capture will be there. But to be honest, guys, I found a video online of Barack Obama visiting Dreamworks. They showed him how they had a mocap kit ready for How to Train Your Dragon. I would imagine, that's just my imagination, like the song says, but I think I would imagine that they would have used it at least for previs purposes. At the end of the day, if you need a character to walk from point A to point B in previs, are you going to spend 10 hours doing it, or are you going to spend 1 minute donning the suit and putting it there to know that it's on set? And if you do visual production, like you would want to do, it's better to use mocap. It gives you quicker feedback. So I think mocap is a good tool even for stylized animation. You don't have to use the mocap data. You record the mocap and then at least you know at which timing things are happening. You can keep it there as a reference, for instance. So there are so many things mocap could be used for in stylized animation too that I think makes sense to keep an eye on it. So at a certain point, I even considered purchasing a Rococo suit for that reason. For myself, for my own pleasure. I wanted to record mocap, but it's still a bit steep for me. I need to have a business case to spend that much money for myself. Maybe instead of buying a motorbike when I will get to 45 years old, I will buy a mocap suit, and then I will invite my date and see, look at this amazing stuff I can record, look at that. And then you see the skeleton in Maya. Wait, where are you going? They don't get it. We have no motion capture data with these fingers, unfortunately, so we will have to do our best to animate them. Now, I still want you to remember John Carter of Mars. 4 hands. Okay, so that means 3 phalanx per each finger, 5 fingers, 15 controls, by 4, 60 controls. Okay, so that was 60 controls. So the way you would animate, you would fix motion capture fingers if you are in a rush, and you're almost always in a rush when you do motion capture anyway, because you have to produce volume, is by starting by creating a rest pose for the finger. So first of all, you want to have a selection set for your fingers. so that you have that selection set always there and you can easily select them and key them when you need them. That's the first thing you always want to do. And then you want to have a library of poses. At the beginning of a production, you will have to make a lot of poses if nobody thought of it. But nowadays, organized animation production comes with poses. So you might be hired in a company and they might have a library of poses ready for the fingers. So you only call them in when you need them. You can use for pose libraries, you can use Studio Library. It's an excellent pose library system. If it opens up, there you go, it's here. So that's very useful. Red9 also has a pose manager in the animation toolkit. Since I am in a rush, I don't want to use either of those. I want to use the pose to shelf tool, which is a very old-fashioned tool that stores stuff in the shelf. The shelf is not the best place to store stuff in, but if you are in a rush. So now what I want to do is, first of all, a rest pose. The rest pose is usually done by rotating all the fingers that way, and then you tend to rotate the fingers which are approaching the pinky a little bit more than the other fingers. So you see how I rotate, deselect, rotate, deselect, rotate, and deselect. The other thing that happens is that usually if you really look at fingers, you realize that fingers don't really rotate. Now I wish I could show you this side of the hand. Fingers don't really rotate, the phalanxes don't really rotate all the same. Usually there is a corner that is bigger than other corners. So if you just rotate all the fingers individually this way, they will always be looking a bit CG-like. So what I tend to do is I tend to give a stronger corner somewhere so that now they look a bit more alive. But you really need to look at references, guys. So there is no hard rule in there, but the references or reference poses for hands that you can find online. So if you Google, for instance, reference poses for hands, you find so many hands poses, and they really are your best friends, because I can guarantee you, if the movie you're working on requires a close-up of hands and those hands are 3D, you're going to spend maybe 20 minutes posing one pose easily, if not more, okay? Because before a 3D model looks compelling, appealing, it's going to take you a while. So there you go. So now I have my nice pose in there, sort of nice. I think that thumb is broken. One common issue with thumb, guys, is that in modeling, for whichever reason, the thumbnail is always at an angle, but really should be that way. That's how the thumb is made, right? In real life. Not this dude, this dude. Not this dude, this dude. Not this dude, this dude. Okay? And you will find out that when you receive a rig from production, you very often have to check the thumb and see if when you rotate the thumb on a single axis, if it goes at the base, towards the base of the pinky, if it goes there on a single axis, you're sort of fine, because that's natural behavior. In this case, the original behavior wasn't that good, but the rig is for free. I'm not going to complain. So I'm selecting all the controls in there, and I really want to, in here probably you would also want to cap the to move the fingers a bit closer to one another. I mean, you can spend ages on fingers, so I will just do a basic pose in there. And then what I will want to do is store this pose. Usually you will store it in a manager, but now I will use this pose to shelf there. And then I will do maybe a fist. So we'll go in there and do a fist in there, but you see it doesn't work too well. So I will just do it this way. When I rotate a part of a limb, I always do so using several controls. I very rarely move a single control, he said, while moving a single control. So now I select all these fingers and I store them and call this a fist, and I store this. And now as I animate, what I can do is I can go in there, and maybe at the beginning I want to have a rest pose, and then as I move forward I can have maybe a rest pose in there as well. And then as the guy moves up, I will make a rest and a fist. That's how you want to animate. So let's say we're working on a short movie all together, on a movie. You want some dude to sit down and do very appealing hand poses, and those hand poses are stored with Studio Library somewhere on the server. So the folder Studio Library is pointing to is on the server, and then every animator will load their scene, and they will start by saying, oh, you know what? I think today I feel like a rest pose. Done. I feel like mirroring it. You open Studio Library, you mirror it. That's how you animate this kind of stuff anyway. And in big productions, say you're working on a movie or on a Disney movie, I would imagine that the supervisors and the leads would do plenty of animation tests before the movie even starts officially. And then they will store a bunch of poses that any junior can employ as a starting pose from their poses. So you would really want to do things that way. So you jot down the poses in there, and then as the character starts moving, you maybe leave another pose in there, and then you relax again. There you go. And now you want to have a look at the animation there. You want to see if that works. And that sort of works in there. Once you have the animation working is when you think in terms of breakdowns. So maybe in the transition is going to be linear for all fingers if I keep it this way. But maybe one thing that I could do is I could grab, say, the thumb and the index, and we know, right? We know that the thumb and the index, when you make a fist, are the last dudes who are closing, right? And that's because the pinky tends to close earlier, and the thumb needs to go on top of the index. So the thumb will definitely be the last one. So maybe I could call in an old acquaintance of mine, the Twin Machine, and I could say, you know what, wait a little bit. If I were Japanese, I would say chotto mate, and I would probably exhaust my knowledge of Japanese for tonight. Although, who knows, maybe one day. So now as the hand closes, you see that now it is not linearly translating between the two poses. It's just creating a breakdown. And this breakdown you can either keep on the timeline, but maybe, and I say maybe one thing that you could do is you could also store the breakdown on your pose library. So now your pose library becomes bigger and bigger, and when you animate, you're just using the poses. It's almost like editing a video at that stage. Now, which other very repetitive task you could imagine could be done with a pose library in an animation movie? If you think of it, characters, they tend to speak for a long time in animation, right? In general, you would want to have mouth expressions saved as poses somewhere, and when you do lip sync, you start with those and you tweak them based on your needs. It spares you a lot of time. I would definitely use that. So as an animator, I remember at the beginning I was a bit proud. I would say, no, the hell with it, I'm going to do every single pose manually with total diligence and discipline. And while that certainly teaches you something, at the same time, you will soon hit a ceiling, after which, I mean, there's just so much you can do as a human being. So after you learned how to do the poses, well, use pre-made poses. I mean, the beauty of CG is that you can reuse assets. You should really, that's the strength of using a computer to work. So you should definitely use that strength to your advantage. Very often, if you work in a very high-end movie, you also have facial motion capture, which is done with those fancy double cameras that you often saw in Avatar when you watched Avatar making ofs. And that gives you pretty good motion, to be honest. And for a shot which is maybe a medium shot, you can just slap that stuff on and it works. And I think that's it for this video. I hope you have found this useful, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Have fun!
Fine massage. Very good go. Blood circulation. Heart problem. Bone problem.